Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1879, just outside the frontier town of Three Pines. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and wild sage when she slipped. Victoria Fairchild had barely stepped off the coach when her boot caught on a patch of churned-up mud by the stockyard fence. Her arms flailed, skirts twisting, and with a sharp gasp, she went down hard, palms first, knees soaked, pride wounded. A hand, broad, calloused, steady, reached down. "You all right, miss?" the man asked, voice low and warm like a fire that never threatened to burn. She blinked up, heart hammering faster than it should have. He was tall, sun-browned, with dark hair curling just beneath his hat brim. There was a scar above his chin, faint, like something long healed. His eyes were the kind a woman could fall into, green, steady, and quiet. She swallowed and took his hand. He hoisted her up like she weighed nothing, the strength in his grip making her feel unexpectedly safe. "I did not think Wyoming would greet me with mud," she muttered, brushing at her skirt with a laugh that sounded far too breathless. His mouth tugged into a grin. Three Pines has a habit of catching folks off guard. She looked up at him again and felt something shift in her chest, something she did not have a name for, not yet. He tipped his hat. "Jackson Remer." "Folks call me Jack. Victoria Fairchild," she replied, cheeks warm. "Well, Miss Fairchild," he said, still holding her elbow like he was not ready to let go. "You need help getting anywhere?" She nodded slowly. "The old McGree house. I am the new schoolteacher." Jack's eyebrows rose. "You're the one come all the way from Boston," she blinked. "Yes. How'd you know that? Town's been talkin' for a week," he said, then cleared his throat. "Not that I been listenin' close." She smiled. He walked her the half-mile into town, their boots squelching through the soft earth, horses whickering nearby as they passed the livery. The sky stretched wide overhead, clouds still low from the morning's rain. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 6 years, he said. "Came west after the war, bought a spread north of town. Just me and the land now." She caught the way his jaw tightened around those words. There was weight behind them, but he did not offer it, and she did not ask. Not yet. The McGree house was small, weathered, but clean. The front porch sagged a little on the left side. Jack helped her with her trunk, setting it gently on the worn boards. "You sure you will be all right here alone?" he asked, scanning the empty road, the wind tugging at his coat. "I have been alone before," she said, then looked down. "But thank you." He studied her a moment. "If anything goes wrong, anything at all, you come find me." She nodded. He hesitated, then gave her a small, quiet smile. "It was good meeting you, Miss Fairchild." "It was good falling in the mud," she said before she could stop herself. Jack chuckled, and she liked the sound of it more than she should have. That night, after she unpacked her books and set a kettle on the stove, she stood by the window, watching the moon rise over the hills. She thought of Jack's hand wrapped around hers, the way he had steadied her like he had done it 1,000 times before. And somewhere on the north ridge, Jack sat on his porch, boots up on the rail, staring into the dark, wondering why helping a stranger out of the mud had felt like coming home. The next morning, Victoria stepped into the schoolhouse for the first time. It had one stove, 12 mismatched desks, and a cracked slate board. She stared at it all, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. By the time the sun hit noon, her back ached from scrubbing and sweeping, but the place looked livable. Children would arrive Monday. She had 2 days to make it feel like a place worth learning in. She was just finishing dusting the windowsills when she heard boots on the steps. She turned, heart skipping. Jack stood in the doorway holding a wooden crate. "Thought you might need these," he said, setting the box down. "Paper, chalk, some readers. My ma was a teacher, kept a few things." Victoria stepped closer, touched the top book with reverence. "This is." "Jack, this is too kind," he shrugged, eyes soft. "Just figured it might help." She looked up at him. "It does, very much." Their eyes held for a long moment. "I was going to ride out to the river later," he said quietly. "Check the south fence." "You ever seen the valley from the ridge?" She shook her head. "I could take you," he offered, voice a little unsure now. "If you want," she smiled. "I would like that." By late afternoon, Victoria was on horseback beside him, the wind in her hair, the open sky stretching forever. The trail wound up a steady incline, wildflowers dotting the grass, the river glittering below. When they reached the top, she gasped. "You did not say it was this beautiful," she murmured. Jack just looked at her. "I did not mean the view." She turned, startled, and found him watching her with something raw and real in his eyes. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, slow. "You remind me what it feels like to want more than just getting through the day." She swallowed hard. "You feel like something I did not know I was missing." They stood there, the wind wrapping around them, the silence full of everything unsaid. When he reached for her hand, she let him take it. Her fingers curled into his without hesitation. They stayed like that until the sun dipped low, casting gold across the valley. And on the ride back, neither of them said much, but their hands brushed often, and neither pulled away. The first week of lessons passed under warm skies, and the scent of cottonwoods waking to summer. Victoria kept her voice steady through rows of distracted children, some barely able to sit still, others already hardened by too many hard winters. She learned their names, their tempers, who shared biscuits at lunch and who flinched at sudden noise. She learned which floorboards creaked and how to coax the old stove to life before the morning bell. By Friday, her hands were chapped from chalk and water-pail handles. Still, when she closed the door behind the last child that afternoon, her chest held a quiet pride she hadn't known in Boston. Out here, nothing came easy. But what stayed earned its place. She returned to the McGree house by foot, her boots dusted with dry road, hair pinned but already loosening in the wind. The porch creaked under her step. Inside, the kettle still held warmth from the morning. She lit the lamp early and sat at the small table, a stack of student copybooks in front of her. But her eyes kept lifting to the window. Jack hadn't come by again since their ride. She hadn't expected him to. Not exactly, but each evening that passed without the sound of a horse outside left her unsettled in a way she didn't know how to name. The knock came just after dusk. She opened the door with her shawl still clutched around her shoulders. "I didn't want to bother you before supper," Jack said. "You're not," she replied, stepping aside. He didn't come in, only took off his hat and held it against his chest. "I brought you something." He handed her a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it to find a jar of blackberry preserves, the kind that didn't come from a store shelf but from someone's careful hands and patience. "My neighbor's wife put up too much last summer," he said. "Figured you might like something sweet." "I do," she said softly, fingers tightening on the cloth. "Thank you." He shifted his weight on the step. "I saw some of the children heading home today. Looked like they'd been through a storm, but a good one. They're learning," she said. "Some of them never held a pencil before." He nodded, eyes searching hers. "You look tired." "I am," she admitted, "but not the kind that makes you want to stop." She stepped back then, just a little. "Would you like to come in?" He hesitated only long enough to be polite. Inside, she poured 2 cups of coffee from the kettle and set the jar between them. They sat at the table, the lamplight soft against the walls. Neither spoke for a while. Then Jack said, "I saw a hawk today, hanging over the north ridge. Just still, like it was waiting for the earth to breathe." She looked at him, startled by the image. "Do you ever miss it, the world before you came here?" He didn't answer for a long moment. "There are things I carry, but no, I don't miss the noise. Out here, things speak plain." She traced the rim of her cup. "I used to think I wanted noise, but now I think I just didn't know what quiet could hold." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "What made you come west?" She met his eyes. "My father died last winter. There was no one left to keep me in Boston, and too much memory in every room. I saw a posting. Wyoming needed teachers. I needed somewhere that didn't look like home." Jack's hand brushed the edge of the table just close enough to hers. "You don't seem like someone running." "I'm not," she said. "Not anymore." They sat there, still and close in the hush of the lamp's glow. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing against the windows like something with gentle hands. Jack stood first. "I should let you rest." She followed him to the door. "Thank you for the preserves." He paused on the step, then turned back. "Victoria," she looked up. "I think about that day by the stockyard, more than I should." She didn't look away. "So do I." He gave a small nod, then stepped into the evening. His boots moved quiet across the road, fading into the dark. She closed the door slowly, her palm lingering on the wood. And when she returned to the table, she left the second cup where it was, still warm. By the second week of June, the wind had dried the trails to powder, and a fine film of dust clung to every windowsill in town. On Saturday morning, Victoria stood behind the schoolhouse with a hammer in hand, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a length of muslin pinned between two posts. She was painting the alphabet in dark ink above the fabric's grain, careful to keep her lines straight despite the breeze nudging her wrist. "You always work on your only day off." Jack's voice came from behind her, quiet but close. She didn't turn. "If I don't repair this banner, the children will keep switching their B's and D's." He came around to her side, arms crossed. "You always this stubborn about letters." "Only the backwards ones." He studied the fabric while she dipped her brush again. "You ever do anything without a reason?" She looked up at him now, sunlight catching the curve of her cheek. "Not since I stopped hoping someone else would do it for me." Jack glanced at her hands ink-stained, steady, then reached for the hammer and dropped it into his saddlebag without asking. "You're done for today," he said. Victoria arched a brow. "Is that so? You've done enough for one morning. Come with me." She hesitated. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere the dust can't reach." An hour later, they were riding east of town, past the creek lined in willows and up a slope where the grass grew tall enough to brush her boots in the stirrups. Jack guided them off the trail, through a stand of pines that muffled the sound of hooves, until they reached a clearing ringed with stone and open to the sky. A small lake rested there, fed by snowmelt, still and clear enough to reflect the clouds above. The air smelled of pine sap and moss, the hush so complete it felt like stepping into a pause between heartbeats. Victoria dismounted slowly, glancing around. "It's quiet here." Jack nodded. "I come up here when the world feels heavy." She crouched by the water's edge, trailing her fingers through it. "I used to go to a library basement back in Boston. No one else liked it, too dim, too cold. But it was the only place you could hear yourself think." He sat on a flat boulder nearby, watching her. "What did you think about leaving?" she said, almost to herself. "And what I'd be if I ever did." Jack's gaze didn't shift. "And now that you have?" "I don't know yet," she said, standing. "But I don't feel lost." They walked the edge of the water for a while, saying little. Birds flitted through the branches and a hawk circled overhead, silent and sure. When they stopped, Jack handed her a strip of jerky and a flask from his coat. "You ever think about settling?" she asked after a long sip of water. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes, but I've seen what happens when folks rush into it. They build something before they know where the ground's soft." She studied his face, the way his eyes scanned the horizon even while standing still. "You think this ground's soft?" "I think it's solid," he said. "But I also think you've got roots to grow first." "I've never had roots," she said. He turned to her then. "Maybe you just needed the right place to plant them." Victoria's breath caught at the way he said it, not as a question, not as a hope, but as a fact he'd already decided on. Jack stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough she could feel the warmth of his presence. "I'm not asking for promises, but I'd like to see what this becomes if you'd let me." She looked up at him. "I've never known a man who waited to ask." "I've never had reason to," he said. A long silence passed between them, threaded with wind and the soft lapping of water. She reached out then, fingers brushing his shirt near the shoulder, not for balance, but to be sure he was real. "I'd like to find out," she said. He covered her hand with his voice low. "Then we will." They stayed until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long over the hill. And when they rode back into town, the dust didn't seem so heavy, and the sky carried the hush of something just begun. Victoria rose before first light that Sunday, the edges of her quilt still warm from sleep. A distant coyote call faded as she dressed by lamplight. She tied her hair back in a simple knot, her fingers slow, thoughtful. Outside, the sky was just beginning to pale, and the wind carried a trace of wood smoke not hers. She stepped onto the porch, boots scuffing the boards, and saw Jack leaning against the hitching post, reins in hand, a bay gelding beside him. His coat was dusted with frost, and his breath came in clouds. "You're up early," she said, drawing her shawl tighter. "I figured if I waited till decent hours, you'd already be halfway through tasks you weren't meant to do alone." She smiled without meaning to. "Let me get my coat." They rode west, away from town, toward the bluffs that overlooked the dry basin. Jack didn't say where they were going, and she didn't ask. He kept his horse to a slow walk, letting the quiet between them settle like wool, thick, warm, understood. Eventually, they reached a stretch of land where nothing grew but low sage and stubborn grass. Jack dismounted, tied the reins to a dead juniper, and motioned for her to follow. She stepped down, the wind tugging at her skirts. "This was theirs," he said, gesturing toward a set of stone markers half buried in the slope. The ground was uneven, but the rocks had been placed with care. One cross still held a rusted nail through the top beam. She knelt beside one, brushing away the dust with her glove. "Your family," he nodded once. "Wife, daughter." Victoria stayed silent. "I ain't spoken of them in years," Jack said, crouching beside her. "She died birthing the girl. Girl made it 2 winters. Fever took her before the thaw. Her throat tightened. You were here alone after. I stayed because there was nowhere else I could stand to be." The wind shifted, lifting a curl from her neck. She didn't reach for his hand, but she moved closer, their shoulders nearly touching. "I never thought I'd feel right standing beside someone again," he said quietly, "but you being here, it doesn't feel like trespass." She turned to him. "I didn't come west to belong to anyone, Jack. I know. But I think I could belong beside you." He looked at her then, a long, steady look that carried nothing rushed and nothing uncertain. "You already do." They stood together at the graves until the sun climbed high enough to warm their backs. Jack offered no stories, no names. Victoria asked for none. Grief didn't need retelling to make it true. On the way back, they didn't speak of the past. Instead, they passed a herd of pronghorn grazing the ridge, and Jack pointed out a kestrel nest tucked into the rocks. He rode slightly behind, as if guarding her from the wind, his shadow long beside hers. That evening, she lit a single oil lamp and left the door unlatched. Jack didn't knock when he came. He stepped in, hat in hand, and paused just long enough for her to rise from her chair. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she said. "You're not," he answered, crossing the room. When he touched her face, it was with the kind of gentleness that came only from men who had once lost everything. She leaned into his palm like it was the first safety she'd known. They didn't speak again that night. There was no need. The wind pressed against the windows, but inside the stillness was full, like water rising slow in a well. And when the lamp burned low, Jack stayed. His coat hung beside hers, his presence as quiet and certain as morning. 3 weeks passed, slow and full, the kind of days that stacked like stones in a quiet wall measured certain. Victoria marked them less by calendar than by the rhythm of small things. The way the children no longer hesitated before entering the schoolhouse, the way Jack's voice found her name more easily, like it belonged in his mouth. They spent most evenings together now. Not every night, but often enough that the townsfolk had stopped pretending not to notice. No one said much, not out loud, but the glances from the mercantile widow and the nods from the livery boys told her what they thought. A woman alone didn't stay that way long in Three Pines, and when she chose, folks let her. One afternoon, after lessons ended and the children scattered like wind-blown seed, Victoria found herself walking the edge of the north fence behind the school, where the slope dropped off into open pasture. Jack had promised to meet her there, said he needed to bring something by. She stood alone for a while, watching a hawk ride the air above the hills, the sun dipping low enough to stretch gold across the grass. When he arrived, he was on foot, carrying a narrow wooden box under one arm. His sleeves were rolled and his hat tugged low against the light. "You never walk into town unless you're carrying something," she said. He handed her the box. "It's for you." Inside, resting on a bed of old rags, was a set of carving tools well used, their handles worn smooth, each blade honed to purpose. She looked up, brow furrowed. You said once you used to draw," he interrupted gently. "Thought your hands might want something quieter on the days the noise gets too loud." Her throat tightened. "I never said that out loud. You didn't have to." They stood close, the wind moving between them like a breath. Her fingers brushed the chisel handles, and she thought of the cottonwood behind her house, how the bark peeled clean in early summer. The idea of creating something that stayed, something shaped by her hand, it stirred something she hadn't let herself hope for. "There's a shed behind my place," he said after a moment. "Used to be a tack room. Now it's not much more than dust and nails, but if you wanted space to work." She closed the box lid with care. "I think I'd like that." He stepped back then, hands dropping to his sides. "There's something else." Her pulse lifted just a fraction. "What is it?" Jack's eyes didn't leave hers. "There's a plot of land behind the ridge. Not much, but it's sheltered and the soil's better than it looks. I've been thinking of building there, something smaller. Closer to town." She blinked, not daring to breathe. "I don't want to rush you," he said, "but I want you to know I'm not waiting for things to break before I decide. I want you with me, Victoria, not just when the days are soft." She stepped forward, slow but certain. "I've spent most of my life waiting for someone to give me permission to want more. I don't need it anymore." His hand found hers, rough and warm. "Then come build something with me." They didn't kiss, not then. It wasn't needed. The promise between them was heavier than breath and stronger than wind. They walked back together, his box of tools in her arms, the sun falling behind them like a curtain drawn on something old. By midsummer, the foundation stones were laid by hand, Jack's fingers bruised from hauling timber, Victoria's palms blistered from smoothing mortar. The shed behind his house had been cleared, and in it, she carved her first pattern into a piece of pine, a line of prairie grass bent in wind, delicate and true. The children kept coming to class. The schoolhouse warmed in the mornings now, not from the stove alone, but from the steady weight of belonging. When the town held its annual harvest supper in September, Jack stood beside her beneath the lantern strung across the square. He didn't speak much, but his presence was enough to quiet any whisper. Before the first frost, the house was finished. Modest, with a porch wide enough for 2 chairs and a view of the river bend. The day they moved in, Victoria unpacked her books first, setting them on the shelf Jack had built by lamplight. He watched her do it like a man watching something sacred. That night, curled beside him beneath a quilt stitched by a neighbor girl's aunt, she whispered, "I didn't think love would feel like this." He kissed her temple. Like what? Like coming in from the cold. The following spring, they planted a row of lilacs along the fence. The blossoms wouldn't come for another year, but Victoria didn't mind. Not everything had to bloom at once. She had time now. They both did. And when the wind rose again, as it always did, it found the house standing quiet and sure against it, built from hands that had known loss and chose still to shape something lasting.